Get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Midlife is when many women realize they're ready to take fuller ownership of their identity, their choices, and their money. Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens. I'm Tony Stewart, your host. I'm joined today by Tamara Cortoos, a midlife coach. Tamara, welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens.
Hi, Tony. Thanks so much for the intro and for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, it's great to have you here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story and how did it lead you to coaching people through life's transitions?
Well, my story is actually, it comes in different steps, if you like. I've always been a very ambitious type of person. I guess, over 2 decades, more than 2 decades, I spent building what looked like a successful life. I'd lived in Barcelona, in London, in Sydney. I had a great career. I got married. I've got two amazing kids. I traveled to some amazing places. So if someone were to have like this tick list of what constitutes as a successful or a happy grown-up life, I think I would tick off quite a few of those boxes. But in my early 40s, I started realizing that something was off. Something was just not right. And I couldn't really explain what it was because, I realized at some point that my job, there was something wrong about my job. As I said, I've always been a very ambitious person, and I could feel myself like that ambition was not the same anymore. I noticed that the spark, if you like, was gone a little bit around work. Which is a shame because I've always loved my job. I love to work. I spend a lot of time at work as well. So for me, that was so unusual. And I kept thinking things like, is this it now? Am I at the top? It will never get better than this, you know? It's only downhill from here, basically. And I looked at myself and I thought, oh God, is this the best version of me? What kind of impact have I made in the world? Lots and lots and lots of different questions and doubts and challenges that I felt, but I'm a very pragmatic person. So I thought, okay, the main questions that I have seem to be career related. So let's fix that. I went back to school. I got a couple of degrees in change management, and I went to my very first job interview. I had moved back in the meantime to my native country, which is Belgium in Europe. And that first job interview to me was what really worked as a catalyst, basically. Because during that interview, I was, it's a normal job interview. I was talking a lot about my experience and my motivation to start in a new industry and everything I could bring to the table because, I'd set up businesses. I founded a business. I ran large teams. I had quite a lot of things I thought to offer. But during that interview, the HR guy at the other side of the table, he went like, that's amazing, Tamara, all the stuff that you have. God, you would be you would be a star, but we're not gonna offer you a job. And I said, well, I don't understand. Why is that? And he said, because you're too old to invest in.
Hmm.
And I was so shocked, Tony. I was shocked, but also very angry that he said that to me. It took a while for that anger to kind of subside a bit. And in a way, I don't want to say I have to be grateful to him, but he was a catalyst for me to look at my life, look at the questions that I had, and start trying to find answers, because I realized somewhere along the way that all the questions and the doubts and the challenges that I was running into, that they were typical of a phase of life called midlife. And this man had just thrown in ageism, but that's also almost a challenge of midlife. I was only 44 at the time, you need to know, like this is several years ago now. So I started doing what I do best because I've got a research-based background. So I started researching, I started reading up, I started, looking at academic papers and books around midlife and psychology and even marketing and lots of different elements, all to do with midlife. And to me, that was just a way of trying to cope with this, right? It's changed my life around quite a bit. I retrained yet again, I seem to be collecting diplomas as I go along. It's my stress response, I think. I retrained as a life coach, focused on people in midlife who had also questions and doubts and challenges, all the stuff that I had been dealing with and that I had for myself, I felt like I had found answers to. I wanted to help people with that as well. So I started coaching. I set up an online academy. It's Midlife Crossroads Academy, that one is called, where I offer online programs, again, all aimed at different aspects of midlife, finding your identity, dealing with transformation, dealing with changes professionally or whatever it is. So that sits all in Midlife Crossroads Academy. So it's a bit of a long answer to your question, about what my story is. Basically, I realized midlifers deserve better, and I wanted to be part of the solution for them.
I like that. The midlifers deserve better. And it is crazy that somebody said that to you when you're in your mid 40s, because it's like that seems very young.
It
And
is. You have to work a long time still, for someone to say that I was literally mid-career. It's crazy. I still had as much career in front of me at that point as I had behind me. So for someone to say you're too old, like where does that leave me and millions of other people who are the same age or even older? We're written off.
yeah, so why do you believe there is that, do we call it a stigma or just thought process around midlife is, I mean, this is clearly a huge issue, and I've heard this from other people that, why do you think people react this way?
I was actually reading up recently around research that has been done around that kind of topic. It is because from a certain age, and that age sits around 45, people's potential is judged differently. So the problem is, of course, potential is a very subjective term. If you ask someone what someone's potential is at 28 compared to what someone's potential is at 48, there's a big difference in people's perception of what that would be like. So for someone who's older, the potential is seen as very little, unfortunately, which also means that the older you get, the less chance for promotion you get, the less chance for training, the less opportunities for training is being offered to you, because there's some idea, everybody has this apparently, that the older you get, the less almost return on investment there will be. So the less people invest in older people, or companies invest in older people.
Yeah, which doesn't make any sense because you do pick up some life experience and everything.
Of
And as you
course.
said, there's still a long period. And when you look at leaders of teams and companies and organizations, they're not in their 20s usually.
No,
So,
absolutely not. And yes, I mean, I run like quite a lot of workshops, and one of them is it's called Bold Not Old. It's my favorite one because it's all about the positive things that aging gives you. And one of those things, well, there's a lot of advantages to getting older, but life experience and wisdom, if you can develop it. I mean, there's such advantages that you have over a 25-year-old, say. I mean, I don't want to be negative about younger people. You know, I used to be younger than say, I don't say younger. Um, but everybody has something to offer. And the older you get, the way I see it, the more you have to offer in terms of experience, knowledge, like you know how to deal with a problem because there's a good chance you have encountered that problem before, so you know how to deal with it. There's so much to learn from someone who has a bit more experience in life or experience at work. There's no reason to write them off at all.
yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's a huge problem. You know, there are a few societies and cultures where they truly honor, the elderly, but most cultures don't for whatever reason, and it seems like you're overlooking just a great source of wisdom. But I think the smartest people don't overlook that it's short-sighted to say, well, somebody who's 20 years old, we're going to invest in them. But the thing to consider is that most people don't stay with the same company anyway, or the same organization for the duration of 40
Yeah.
years. So the money that you're spending anyway, they're going to take their training and experience and go somewhere else anyway. So, it seems short-sighted just overall.
Yes, totally agree.
So, the next thing, is we talk about is, that it's, you know, that you work a lot with women in midlife. So what's a common question that you hear from women in midlife? Because I think there's also a difference in perception with men and women in midlife is, men are, they get gray hair, they're considered wise, and, it's different for women. So what do you hear from women that's different?
It's actually a very simple question that I hear most often from women in my practice, and that is this it? Um, the women I work with are women who've done a lot of things right in life. Yes, I mean, they built careers, they raised families, they supported their partner, they just kept a lot of plates up in the air for decades. And then they get to their 40s or 50s and they look around and they think, hang on, life is fine, nothing is really wrong, but it doesn't feel the way they thought it would. And there's often this feeling of restlessness, just that sense that something isn't quite aligned anymore in their lives. So that question of, is this it? Then usually deepens, once you start talking to them, and it then actually usually becomes, who am I now? My identity. Who am I? And what do I want my future to look like? So that's actually the key questions that I deal with. Who am I now? And what do I want my future to look like? And the future could be work related or life related, if you like.
Yeah, well, and I would say that for most people, we say there's a work-life balance, but I think for a lot of us, there, our work and life can blend in, especially when we find something that we really are passionate about. So how do you help, women find, what they want out of life? Is that part of the academy to help them with that discovery?
Yes, indeed. I do help them there. It's what I always say, right, is be curious about yourself. That's always the first step because you need to start asking questions um, about what gives you energy, for instance, or what drains your energy? What do you enjoy doing? What is your ikigai? I don't know if you've ever heard of the Japanese concept of ikigai. Basically, it's literally finding what gives you joy on a daily basis. You'd be surprised how few people can answer the question, what gives you joy on a daily basis? People don't think about that. But in midlife, it becomes very important to think about the little things in life, if you like. Also, what we do in the academy, apart from curiosity, apart from ikigai, it's being aware of who you are. What I mean is not just your strengths, your personality, but also things like your values. You know, what is important to you at this stage in life? What drives you, if you like? It's different from what motivates you, because a motivator is also something to look at. What kind of stories do you tell yourself? You know, we've all been, we all have self-beliefs, positive or negative. We've all been told things about our parents, by our parents or by society around us, about who we are, about things that we should do or shouldn't do. You know, we look at all of those things, and then we look at, okay, what still fits you now? What do you actually, who do you want to be? Who do you feel you are now? What kind of things do you want to drop? What kind of beliefs do people have about you that you think like, you know what? I don't want to be the one anymore that is, for instance, the organizer. I've organized family get-togethers. I'm just a very simple example here. I've organized family get-togethers for the past 20 years. I don't want to have to cook for 30 people 3 times a year anymore. Someone else can do that now because I want to spend some time on myself. And it's very difficult for women to make that jump, just to convince them that they are allowed to put themselves first and they do not have to keep living up to other people's expectations all the time. It's a huge ask of them. And it does take some work, of course, to get there.
Yeah, I think that's really important is that you don't have to live up to other people's expectations. I mean, that's draining in itself is doing that is, we talk about showing up authentically and everything else. But if you're doing all these things for other people, it does get really draining and it's not
Yeah,
fulfilling.
indeed,
So,
exactly that. It takes away so much energy if you do things just because you've always done them, or because others expect it of you, or you have been told by your parents or your partner or society, whatever it is, to be a certain person who acts in a certain way and who talks in a certain way. It's exhausting.
yeah. So the question, of course, is what is a tip or, process that people could start to go to, what do you recommend to people, to start making that switch once they realize they're there is, what do you tell them to get started on the process of rethinking, how they do that, how they show up?
As I said, I always start by saying, be curious about yourself, listen to yourself, right? Try to get to know yourself again. Look at your life. Look at the things you still enjoy. Look at the things you don't enjoy or that you feel are draining you, and be aware of them. Be aware of how much time and effort they cost you, because everything has a cost attached to it. If it drains you, if it makes you feel tired, if you don't enjoy it anymore, that should be something that you need to phase out or cut out of your life. And that's the first step, because it frees up time to do something else. You know, maybe, it's, I don't know, there's a lot of different things that people figure out that they actually enjoy doing, or they find that, the kind of conversations that they enjoy having are different now. The topics that they talk about are different now than maybe 10, 15 years ago, or even 2 years ago. So it's all about being curious and following those little signals, if you like, and see where that takes you. I know it's pretty vague to talk about it this way, but there's the next chapter in life, midlife. It rarely appears as one big clear answer to you. It's usually a range of small steps and small discoveries along the way, and it takes some time. People sometimes get impatient, but it does take time to make changes to your life.
Yeah, well, I think that's important to realize is that it's a transition because you are changing so many things. And I think for women, it is harder too, is because you throw in that a lot of women are caregiving for their parents or their in-laws or extended family. And so that's another wild card that's placing
Yeah,
stress on them. And and that I think with caregiving, that it's okay to hire somebody, that you don't have to be
there you
the
go.
caregiver personally. So, I think that's one thing that's come up with other guests that they've talked about.
Yeah,
So just real quick, before we start to wrap up, I want to switch gears because I think this is super important is, the question of women knowing where they stand financially. Why is it non-negotiable for every woman to always know where they stand financially? Whether they're married, not married, partnership, not partnership.
yeah. Very simply put, financial clarity equals freedom. That's it. I see there's a lot in long relationships of women that I'm coaching. Over time, one person becomes the one that manages the money, and it's often the partner, not the woman. And it's not because anyone planned it that way, it just happens, but life can change very quickly. You can get divorced, or someone can fall ill, there's widowhood, there's job loss, and suddenly you're in a situation where you need to make financial decisions really fast. So if you already know where you stand, you can make those decisions from a much calmer position. You know, you don't need to control everything. It's not like you have to control finances all the time, but you do need to understand the basics of your own financial life.
Yeah, and I completely agree. In fact, I have a new program coming out, which may be hopefully out by the time this podcast is published, to help people create what I call financial readiness plan, so that they can not only have a letter of instruction for their heirs, but even something, if they're cognitively declining, the other spouse can start to step in, because
Yeah.
that's something that happens is, one spouse has been managing the money or the finances, like in our house, I tend to do that because I work in the world of money. So it's natural for me to take on that role. But if something happens to me and I start to cognitively decline, my wife needs to know what's going on and
Yeah.
what should happen. So it's also a gift, I think, to your loved ones, that if you're the person who has the money role, is that you talk to your loved ones about it as part of that.
Yes, absolutely. I always say, like, financial awareness is not about expecting the worst. It's about being prepared for life. So it's a different perspective, right? You need to be prepared. And when when I see women in my practice who, talk about financial areas, like it always strikes me when I ask them questions like, do you know what accounts exist? Or do you know where the important documents are? Do you know who to call about the mortgage, the insurance, your pension, your partner's pension? And it's so basic. But many women realize too late that all of that information lives in one person's head and it's not their head. So having a shared overview even makes an enormous difference if something unexpected happens. So I'm very glad to hear, Tony, that you're working on something along those lines as well, like to help women be prepared for life.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sort of thinking of it as an in case of emergency plan. And, like something I've done and is create a spreadsheet of pretty much all of our account numbers and passwords
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And I've shared that with my wife. And so if something
Great.
happens, she can access everything. Because I think that's the other thing people don't think about is like you have all these accounts. And as you point out, if somebody doesn't know that the accounts exist, they can't access them. And if they don't, and along with that is the access instructions. I think the tricky part we haven't figured out quite yet is both us personally and that I've heard from other guests is a whole two-factor authentication
Yeah.
issue is because that's tied into your phone. And unless your spouse is able to access your device, they're not going to be able to authenticate your account. So that's something else for people watching and listening is to think about is, can your spouse access your device? Otherwise, they're going to have a hard time accessing the accounts with the two-factor
Yeah.
authentication. So
Yeah.
things are
Absolutely.
changing quickly. So
Yes, indeed. But also simple things like here in Belgium, as soon as someone um, passes, the accounts get blocked. So that's an issue, of course, if you have only joint accounts, because you cannot get any money out of an ATM. The account is blocked for a
really,
while. Yeah, no, no, no. That's typical here, but you need to
wow.
be aware of that kind of thing so you can take precautions because you will need money to live, you know. Yeah, you will have bills to pay. Um, and it takes a little while to open up the accounts again and get access to them again or get access to a minimum amount of money before you start racking up the debts. Things like that. It's very small things, but you do need to be aware of that as a woman. Because what
Yeah.
happens if your husband passes and then you're there without any access to money? What do you do?
Yeah. And that seems like it would defeat the purpose of having a joint account, so
It does in a way, but then a lot of women, like couples, have joint accounts because it's easier, of course. But again, it's often the husband that manages the joint account. So women don't even really know what's happening with it and what kind of bills come in and what still needs to be paid or what comes out automatically every month. It's like there's so little knowledge about these practical things. It always surprises me.
yeah, no, I'm with you. It surprises me too. So if you're watching and listening, hopefully this helps you, have decide to have a money conversation with your spouse. Start having, I recommend people have family financial meetings. Some people call it financial date nights. Whatever it is to talk to your spouse is about this is you need to know for yourself. And if you're the spouse who manages the money, is you need to share. You
Yes,
need to open
indeed.
up and take the time. And it's hard if you have kids and your life is to take that, but schedule it as a block of time. I recommend that you have it as a formal, well, not a formal meeting, but that you put it aside as you would a business meeting and keep that appointment, keep it on point, and talk about the finances.
Yeah.
So. So anyway, Tamara, to close out, I have what's called the Get Ready Hot Take Trio, and these are three quick questions I ask all of my guests. The first one is, what's one myth you're trying to break about midlife?
That the best years are behind you. That's something
Ooh.
that annoys me, how people constantly say, like, oh, the best is behind me. I think your best years in life are the ones that you choose that are your best.
That you choose. I like that because I know it is harder as you get older to sometimes think about that because things are different. You don't have some of the physical, I guess, capabilities. I don't know if that's quite the right word that you have when you're younger. So it's like enjoying what you do have because that's what they do say is that you have more life satisfaction actually when you're older.
Yes, indeed.
So
That's actually been scientifically proven, by the way. Well, research, backed up by research, I should say, indeed, that midlife is, in terms of life satisfaction, is a low point, but it goes up again and it actually goes higher. Your life satisfaction increases to a point that's often higher than it was in your early 20s when you thought you could never be happier.
yeah, well, when you're in your 20s, you think, you're undefeatable,
Yes.
you can do
Oh,
anything you
yes.
want.
How
So
naive we all were.
exactly, you're invulnerable.
Yes.
So
God.
tomorrow, let's get out the time machine for a minute. If you go back in time, knowing what you know now about money, what advice would you give your younger self?
I don't know if you want to hear this, Tony, but I would say take more risk. I've always been very careful with money, like super careful. I'm someone who saves up for things rather than get a loan. I've never gotten a loan apart from a mortgage in my entire life. Um, but I would take more risk, for instance, buy like a house to flip, for instance, and earn some more money that way, or start investing in the stock exchange quite a bit earlier in life, things like that. Someone said earlier today to me, money makes money. And I think I I wished I had realized that sooner.
Yeah, I think, the basic takeaway from that for me is that you need to learn about money at an early age and then start
Yeah.
acting on it.
Yep.
And I think that's an issue. And, I've had a lot of guests on the show who talk about early financial literacy, and that just underlines the importance of early financial education, but then actually putting it into action. It's not just knowing it, but what you said is actually executing on that knowledge. And
Yes.
that's a tricky part.
That is a tricky part. And of course, it doesn't always work out the way you wish. Say, stock exchange, for instance, is risky, but I didn't know anything about that until about, I guess, about my mid 40s. So I'd never even considered it. And now I think, oh God, I should have learned about these kind of things much earlier in life. And I didn't.
Yeah, and I know for women that's definitely a huge issue. So, for people watching and listening, I've had some past podcast episode guests, Janine Furpo from Invest for Better, who runs investing circles for women to help women get started investing. It's a
Hmm.
nonprofit. I'll put a link in the show notes for people who are watching and listening to Janine's episode because that's what her organization is set up to do is to help women invest with their values and invest for impact. So um, it is an issue. So, but everyone can invest.
Yes. And that's a great initiative that you just mentioned as well. It's really good because women are very far behind men in terms of investing. So we should catch up.
Yeah, and studies show women are actually better investors. So,
We are.
so that's the crazy part. But life is pretty crazy. So, you never know. So to wrap up, the last question is, what is your number one tip to help people get ready before life happens?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. Um, I guess maybe I don't want to say because it's a show about or it's a podcast about investment, but I don't want to repeat the topic that we just talked about. I think it's very important to know um your investment, but maybe maybe something I want to say as well is that be aware that big changes or big dramatic changes aren't always the answer.
I
Um,
like that.
People in midlife especially, they always think that they should make like they should reinvent themselves. You hear that a lot. Midlife is the time when you reinvent yourself. And for some people, that is a good idea to quit your job and then move to another country or take up skydiving to make midlife meaningful. For some of people, that works, but it doesn't need to be a Hollywood movie every time. It can be a subtle little change as well. Different priorities, learning to set boundaries, making time for things that light you up. That's fine too. You do not have to burn your entire life down.
I love that. You don't have to burn your entire life down because I think that does happen sometimes. That's a stereotypical, especially with
Yes.
men, is, you know, everything goes and, it's a
Yes.
completely different life. And I don't think anybody is happy when they make those huge dramatic changes because they're not really who you are. Um,
No, it's living up to almost a cliche or a stereotype, and that
yeah.
is very rarely a good idea.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that. So that's a great place to close out. So, Tamara, where can people learn more about you and your work and the Midlife Crossroads Academy?
Yes, well, Midlife Crossroads Academy, it's literally, you can find out more on my website, midlifecrossroadsacademy.com. That's for those online programs that people can do. They can also find the Academy on Facebook and on Instagram. If people would be interested more in live coaching or participating in workshops or anything like that, they can find me on midlifecoach.be. I offer coaching, everything basically in English and also my native language, which is Dutch. But, I've lived so long in English speaking countries, I'm pretty comfortable in English as well. So I speak to people from all over the world. So everybody's welcome if I can help you.
Fantastic. And for everybody watching and listening, as always, there will be links to Tamara's website. And so you can get in contact with her as well as her LinkedIn profile. Tamara, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony. I really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, appreciate the conversation. Thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in to this episode of Get Ready Before Life Happens. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money in midlife, please be sure to share and subscribe. You can also support the Get Ready movement at buymeacoffee.com/Tony Stewart or go to my website to receive my newsletter. Because when life happens, the way you think about money matters.